The man had not stopped laughing for a full 30 seconds. He stood at the gate of a farm just east of Timmins, Ontario, suit jacket, pressed sharp enough to cut glass, a company folder tucked under one arm, and a legal compliance letter folded into thirds in his breast pocket like a loaded weapon. Everything about him said corporate. Everything about him said this would be quick. The man he was laughing at wore mud-caked rubber boots, a flannel shirt so faded it had forgotten its original color, and an expression so calm it bordered on unsettling. He didn't flinch. He didn't look away. He just stood there still as the fence post beside him and let the laughter run out of air on its own. "Let me get this straight," the manager said, wiping the corner of his eye. "You actually called me out here to tell me that you don't want us to stop the sawdust deliveries because the sawdust is valuable." He said the word valuable, the way people say things they find genuinely hilarious. The farmer didn't shift his weight. He didn't raise his voice. He just waited one more second, the kind of second that makes a room go quiet, and then he spoke. "I didn't call you here about the sawdust," he said. "I called you here to show you what I built." Then he pushed the gate open and stepped back. The manager stopped laughing. But to understand what he saw when he walked through that gate, to understand how a boy from a dying farm surrounded by industrial waste became something no one in that town could have predicted, you have to go back to 1998, back to a kitchen table with an unpaid mortgage on it and a mother who never once asked the world for a favor. Back to the moment a child pushed his hand into a pile of garbage and felt something no one else had bothered to feel. If you have ever been laughed at for believing in something no one else could see, this story was written for you. Subscribe now if you believe patience can outwork talent. And before we begin, drop a comment and tell us where in the world you're watching from. The Thornton farm sat on 42 acres of thin, exhausted soil, about 3 kilometers east of the Kidd Creek Mill District. The land had been in the family since Caleb's grandfather first broke the ground in 1961. Back then, the soil was dark and willing. It grew what you planted. It forgave mistakes. But soil doesn't forgive forever. By the late 1990s, the land had nothing left to offer. The fields didn't grow food anymore. They grew silence. And then, as if the land dying wasn't enough, so did the man who loved it most. Caleb's father, Frank Thornton, collapsed in the barn on a January evening in 1996. Heart attack. No warning, no goodbye. He was 44 years old. He left behind a mortgage that was already late, a tractor so rusted it screamed every time it turned over, and a wife named Ruth who had never once in her life planned to run a farm alone. Caleb was 11, old enough to understand what death meant, too young to do anything about it. He stood at the funeral in a borrowed jacket and watched his mother's face and saw something that would stay with him for the rest of his life. Not tears. Ruth Thornton was not a woman who cried in front of people. What he saw was something worse than crying. He saw a woman doing math in her head at her own husband's funeral, calculating whether she could keep the lights on for another month. She kept them on, not for 1 month, but for every month after that. Ruth did not ask neighbors for help. She sold what the farm could still grow, stretched every dollar until it tore, and worked from before the sun came up to long after it went down. She moved through that farm like a woman who had made a private deal with the universe. I will not stop, and you will not take anything else from me. Caleb watched her every single day. The way children watch their parents when they finally understand that the adults in their lives are not invincible, that they are tired, that they are scared, that they keep going anyway, not because they are brave, but because no one gave them the option to stop. He wanted to fix something. He didn't know what yet. In the spring of 1997, a mill foreman from the Northgate Timber Processing Facility had knocked on Frank's door with a simple proposition. The mill was producing more sawdust than it could dispose of. Would Frank mind if they dumped their excess on the edge of his property in exchange $40 a month? Cash. Frank had said yes. $40 was $40 when you didn't have $40. Then Frank died, and the trucks kept coming. Nobody called to cancel the arrangement. Nobody asked Ruth. The trucks just came the way bills come, the way winter comes, whether you're ready or not. Ruth never stopped them. $40 was still $40. By the end of summer 1998, 4 enormous mounds of pale yellow sawdust sat along the fence line, each one roughly 4 meters high and 12 meters long. The neighbors saw an eyesore. The factory called it disposal. Ruth called it manageable. But Caleb, the quiet boy who watched everything and said almost nothing, walked up to those mounds one October afternoon and did something no one else had ever thought to do. He touched them. He pushed his hand into the base of the oldest mound. The air outside was cold enough to see his breath. The ground beneath his boots was hard, and he stopped. It was warm, not a little warm. The sawdust at the center of that mound was generating heat, real unmistakable heat radiating outward from somewhere deep inside the pile like a heartbeat no one had ever bothered to check for. He pulled his hand out slowly and stared at his palm. His fingers were warm. In October, on a farm where the soil was too dead to grow a decent row of potatoes, something inside that pile was alive. He came back every day for 2 weeks, pressing his hand into different parts of different mounds, mapping the heat with his fingers the way a doctor checks for a pulse. It was always there, always in the center, always in the oldest piles. And this 11-year-old boy, standing on a bankrupt farm with no father and no future that anyone could see, decided without telling a single soul that he was going to find out what it was. Because sawdust is not garbage. It never was. Sawdust is wood reduced to its smallest possible form. Every particle contains cellulose lignin and trace minerals. A single, mid-sized timber mill can generate 20 to 40 tons of it per week. The world produces millions of tons every year and calls it waste because nobody ever stopped long enough to ask what it actually is. Caleb stopped. By 13, he had borrowed every book on soil science that the Timmins Public Library would lend him. He started a notebook, small spiral-bound green cover, and recorded everything: temperatures, colors, smells, changes. He learned words like microbial decomposition and carbon to nitrogen ratio and humic acid formation, and slowly he began to understand. Sawdust does not just sit there, it transforms. Under the right conditions, it generates heat, breaks down, and becomes dark, crumbly, rich organic matter, almost exactly like the fertile topsoil that healthy farmland needs. But raw sawdust applied directly to growing soil does the opposite of helping. It locks up nitrogen. It can acidify. It will kill a crop. Caleb learned that the hard way in the spring of 1999. He convinced his mother to let him spread partially broken down sawdust over 2 rows of potatoes. Ruth said yes, not because she believed it would work, but because she believed in the boy asking. The potatoes came up stunted, pale, sickly, nitrogen-starved. Beside them, the untreated rows grew tall and green, and the contrast was so brutal it looked like the earth itself was making fun of him. Ruth came out and stood beside him. She didn't say a word. She didn't need to. Caleb went to his room and didn't come out for dinner. But the next morning, before sunrise, he was in the field with a shovel. He pulled every stunted plant, dug out every trace of sawdust, and went inside and opened his notebook to a blank page. He wrote one word at the top: balance. The solution was to feed the process what it needed: nitrogen, manure kitchen scraps, grass clippings, roughly 25 to 30 parts carbon to 1 part nitrogen by weight. Get it right, and the pile heats up. The microbes multiply, the material transforms. Get it wrong, and the pile just sits there, a monument to wasted effort. Caleb started getting it right in 2001. In the far northwest corner where the worst soil sat pale and gray, the grass came in greener. The ground started holding water. Nobody walking past would have noticed. But Caleb had been watching that corner for 3 years. He knew. By 2002, the mounds numbered 11. They stretched nearly 80 meters along the fence line. At school, one of the Whitfield boys started calling him Sawdust Caleb, and the name caught on with the particular cruelty teenagers specialize in. A girl told him his farm smelled like a hamster cage. His oldest friend, Tyler Marsh, stopped coming around. People drove past the property and slowed down to stare the way people slow down for accidents. One evening, Ruth sat down across from him at the kitchen table and asked gently whether there was a plan. She needed the farm to start producing, not collecting. Caleb showed her his notebook, the photographs of the northwest corner season by season, the soil changing color. Ruth looked at the photographs for a long time. Then she looked at her son. 15 years old, no friends left, hands that smelled like compost, and eyes that burned with something she could not name but recognize it because she had seen it once before in a man who had loved this same piece of land until the day it killed him. She went to make tea. She never brought it up again because Ruth Thornton understood something about faith that most people never learn. Sometimes you don't need to see the proof. You just need to see the person and decide that they are enough. The summer he turned 18, Caleb drove a borrowed truck 4 hours to Sudbury. A soil scientist named Dr. Sandra Pruitt agreed to sit down with him. She gave him 30 minutes out of professional courtesy. Within 10, she had stopped explaining and started asking. Caleb walked her through 7 years of data: compost temperatures, input ratios, soil color changes, moisture retention patterns. How much land do you have? She asked. 42 acres, but only about 18 of it is workable right now. And how long before the rest is workable? 6 years, maybe 7. Dr. Pruitt nodded slowly. That's probably right, she said. If you keep doing what you're doing. 9 words. The first time in 7 years that anyone outside his family had said anything about his work that was not a laugh or a complaint. He drove home 4 hours in the dark. not confidence, something quieter, certainty. In 2005, he ordered red wiggler worms through the mail and built vermicomposting beds in the old equipment shed. The worms turned finished compost into vermicast dark fine organic matter with more available nutrients than anything money could buy. By 2006, the northern half of the farm was producing vegetables at a quality the Thornton property had never seen. Then came the mushrooms. A used book at a sale in town, 50 cents. Shiitake mushrooms grow on sawdust substrates. Caleb looked up from the page and almost laughed. He had more sawdust than anyone in the province of Ontario. He built 12 inoculated beds in the spring of 2007. By September, he harvested his first 2 kilograms of shiitake. He brought them to the Timmins Farmers Market in a cardboard box with no label, sold out in 40 minutes. He told no one except his mother and kept the sheds locked. Between 2009 and 2014, he built 3 greenhouses along the south edge of the property, each 40 meters long, allowing year-round vegetable production. A produce distributor in North Bay began regular pickups. The mushroom operation expanded into a converted barn with climate control. By 2016, Caleb Thornton was running a real agricultural operation. And then a letter arrived that threatened to tear all of it apart. Brent Gallagher, 34 MBA, had arrived at Northgate Timber in March 2017 with one mandate: reduce costs by 15% in 12 months. He found the sawdust arrangement buried in a facilities report. $40 a month, no formal contract, just a handwritten note. Frank T. agreed, spring 97. Industrial sawdust had become a commodity. Pellet manufacturers, particle board companies, biomass energy facilities, all paying competitive rates. And Northgate had been giving it away for 20 years. The letter arrived in April 2017. Deliveries would stop within 60 days. The company reserved the right to recover material on the Thornton property. It was not a letter. It was a weapon wrapped in politeness. Caleb read it at the kitchen table, the same table where his mother had done the books by calculator light when he was 11. He set it down. He looked out the window at the greenhouses, the compost operation, the mushroom facility, the fields alive with crops growing in soil he had built with his own hands. He picked up the phone. He called the factory. He requested a meeting. Gallagher agreed. He scheduled 15 minutes. He pulled up to the property on a Thursday morning in May. Caleb was waiting at the gate. Rubber boots, flannel shirt, an expression so still it could have been carved from wood. "Walk with me," Caleb said. The first thing Gallagher saw were 3 connected greenhouses, each 40 meters long, producing year-round vegetables for 4 municipalities. Then the compost operation, 6 Bay, turned windrow composting processing waste from 17 restaurants, 2 grocery chains, a school board food program. The city of Timmins was paying Caleb to divert organic waste from the landfill. Service contract, 3 years, renewable. Then the mushroom facility, climate-controlled, shiitake oyster lion's mane, 7 tons annually, a waiting list of buyers. Then the fields, 36 of 42 acres in active production. Soil that had tested below 2% organic matter in 1998 was now above 7%, among the richest in the region. Caleb handed Gallagher a binder of certified lab reports without comment. 11 full-time employees, a processing building, a website, a logo, a brand. At the far end of the property near the old fence line where the first trucks had dumped sawdust in 1997, the mounds were gone. A windbreak of planted spruce stood in their place. The ground was dark and loose and smelled like rain. "That's where it started," Caleb said. Gallagher looked at the ground. He looked at the farm. He looked at the man beside him. Annual revenue exceeding $800,000, 2 additional contracts in negotiation. He had come to deliver a compliance warning. He did not deliver a compliance warning. "What would it look like," he said quietly, "if we worked together?" The agreement they signed in September 2017 was simple. Northgate would deliver specific sawdust grades, sorted and scheduled. In exchange, they received priority purchasing rights for Caleb's compost for their reforestation nursery program. A soil-to-forest loop. Sawdust becomes compost. Compost grows trees. Trees become sawdust. The cycle begins again. By 2022, Thornton Agricultural Systems had expanded to a second property, more greenhouses, a second mushroom facility, a demonstration composting program hosting students from 3 colleges. Caleb had spoken at a soil health conference in Guelph, 45 minutes without notes, and the truth had been more than enough. He still drove the same truck his mother had kept running after his father died. Ruth was 67 now. On warm evenings, she walked the property with her son and didn't say much. She walked through the greenhouse and touched the leaves of the plants the way she used to touch things when she was checking if they were real. She had worried once about what would become of this land after her. She did not worry about that anymore. There is a version of this story that is about money. the revenue, the contracts, the second property. Those things are real and they matter. But that is not the story. The story is about what Caleb Thornton felt when he pushed his hand into a pile of sawdust in October 1998. Heat where everyone else saw garbage, life where everyone else saw waste. Most of what the world considers waste is not waste. It is material that arrived somewhere inconvenient and was never looked at long enough to be understood. Caleb Thornton looked long enough. For 20 years, he refused to look away. And the man who drove to his gate with a legal letter and 15 minutes on his calendar drove away 3 hours later, having signed a cooperation agreement and made 2 phone calls he hadn't planned to make. He never laughed about the sawdust again. If this story reminded you that the greatest things are often built from what others leave behind, drop a comment below. Tell us which moment stayed with you, and if you believe that patience, persistence, and the courage to see value where no one else looks are the things that truly change a life. Subscribe and stay with us, because this is not the last story like this. And the next one might be yours.